All right, so we're going to do something a little bit different than what we have been doing. So I think one of the biggest problems that we have in our society, because I watch a whole lot of debates and conversations and interviews, and the problem is if you're watching the news, you're getting little bitty sound bites. You're not really getting any content. If you're watching a debate, you have two people face to face. They can't really get out all of the argument that they want to say because they're being interrupted or because they don't have time or they don't want to, take the whole segment for themselves. And so you end up getting, again, these little snippets of what's going on. But when the whole debate is said and done, everybody gets up believing the same thing they did when they got there, and nobody's ever convinced of what there's very few opinions that are being changed. And I've been trying to figure out, well, how do you go about doing something like this and allowing everybody to say what's on their mind and actually get the details and the facts out instead of sitting here and debating back and forth. And there is a downside to this because you don't get you're not going to get the feedback. You say something and there's not an immediate response to it, and there's goods and pros and cons of all that. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to present an argument on video, and I'm going to challenge any of the left wing people that want to come and give the counter argument to do the same thing. Do a video. We'll link our videos together and let people watch both opposing views. And I'm going to try to keep it to a single subject so that we're not bouncing all over the place and covering a whole spectrum of stuff. We'll do individual videos for individual topics, and then we'll let people decide for themselves which argument makes the most sense to them. I don't know if you're going to convince anybody any better than what's going on today, but I feel like maybe if data is presented in a more meaningful way as a standalone subject instead of having all this debate back and forth, maybe we'll get somewhere. Maybe not. But here goes. So today's topic is going to be on slavery, and slavery is it's a crazy topic because almost I would venture to say that 99.9% of the people alive today look back on slavery and think, what in the hell were they thinking? I mean, it's unbelievable that humans did that to each other. I can't get my head wrapped around it. I'm glad that I wasn't alive back then. It's just crazy. But to assume that man is good and that man always does the best thing is extremely naive at best. So we just kind of have to throw that away and move on. The big thing, though, that I wanted to kind of get into with slavery is where did it originate? Why were the slaves brought over here, and who had them when they came over here? Because one of the things that everybody likes to say, and it is true to an extent, is that the entire Civil War was fought because of slavery. And that was a big part of it, but it wasn't the only part of it. And I'm going to kind of try to make a case for why I believe this. So the first problem with slavery is, where did the slaves come from? How did they get here? And nobody really wants to talk about this anymore. They try to hide this fact and just say that white man bad and he did everything. But the fact is that the majority of the slaves that came to this country, they came from Africa, but they came here by Africans. So, to assume that white men got on ships and sailed over to Africa, captured a bunch of slaves, a bunch of innocent people, and brought them over here to be slaves is kind of naive. I don't think anybody over here was even wanting to do anything like that. And again, they were evil bastards to have the slaves in the first place. To even buy another human being and say that they were your property is just, I can't even, I don't know how you get to that point in your life. But we also have to remember that people do things based on the environment that they're in. So, right now, an American sits here and we so easily make judgments against people in the Middle East, the way they treat women and the way they murder each other and the way that they do things and the way the governments are run. But the fact is that's the environment that they were raised in. This is the environment we're raised in. So we have a freedom to think any way we want, but to judge someone else in another part of the world or in another part of our history is really kind of arrogant, if you want the truth, because if it weren't for the fact that you grew up in a free country under a free flag and were able to say whatever you wanted to say, you would have a completely different set of ideas. Slavery could still exist today if that was the norm, but thank goodness it's not the norm. It's things are not that way anymore. But at the time that slavery existed, that was the normal. The whole world was doing this. It wasn't something that the United States and only white men here in the United States did. There's even black men that owned slaves. So to say that that all white men are evil because of slavery is just stupid. I mean, there's just not anything else to say. That's just a ridiculous argument. The other thing to think about is slavery. The people that owned slaves were rich people that could buy the slaves. They were plantation owners that had the slaves to work on the plantations to field their crops and do other stuff. And back in those times, the southern states all had the food, the crops, that type of an industry that was in the South. The northern states had their steel and machines and the factories and all of the stuff that went along with that. So there were two different parts of the country, two different things that they were doing. And so the plantation owners bought these slaves. But the funny part about it is that the majority of the people, the white people that lived in the United States, they didn't have slaves. They worked their 1 or 2 acre plots and they lived their lives, and they whether they were for or against slavery, I don't know, because none of us know. We weren't here. Nobody alive has ever been a slave. So to assume that you should be paid money because you were your parent or your great grandparents were slaves, it's kind of a ridiculous argument. So, but the big point is that a lot of people, the majority of the white people that were in this country during those times, did not and never did own a slave. I don't know, as far I'll have to look into it because I have an aunt that actually keeps up with all this stuff, but I don't think that my family ever owned any slaves. And so the problem with the whole Civil War was only about slavery, then why did 600,000 people die in the Civil War? Because the plantation owners weren't the ones going out and fighting these wars. They are the war. They are not the one. There weren't 600,000 plantation owners. So why did the common man in his town decide to stand up and fight in the Civil War? And I think you might be interested to do some research and find out why they did do this, because they didn't get up and fight because they felt like the plantation owner, who had been taking advantage of everything for the entirety of the country, deserved to have his slaves. So there were a lot of other complex issues going on at the time that caused the Civil War and caused all of these people to die. Slavery, very, very bad. But to assume that every white person is guilty of slavery just by the mere fact that our skin color is white is the most ridiculous and racist thing that you could ever utter out of your mouth. And the funniest part about all of this is that if you go back to before Barack Obama, we really didn't have a lot of racial problems going on. I mean, we had problems, And I'm going to get into some of these problems in other videos. I want to try to stick this to the slavery issue, but we definitely had problems, and we had things that we needed to work out. But to take us all the way back to slavery, there's a kid that's arguing with me now on my YouTube channel that he actually believes. I don't even know where he gets most of his information because it's just naive at best. But the funniest part about it is they're white. So we've got riots going on in the streets. And yes, there's a lot of black people that are in these riots, so they're not innocent. But there's riots going on in the street, and the blacks are following the white kids. The blacks aren't leading these riots. It's not like these white kids came out to join the blacks. The white kids have come out and torn down the fence and busted the window so that the blacks could run in and steal stuff. So the blacks are actually following ignorant white kids, and then they're all running around screaming out white men are the problem with America. And the whole thing is so asinine that if you were watching it on TV, you probably turn the TV station off, the movie off, because it's just hard to even get your head wrapped around. So we have white kids that have gone to college. They're all college educated, and part of this kid that I'm talking about on YouTube, his thing is that he's college educated. I'm not, and he actually says this in the comments if you go watch them, is that I'm an ignorant Southerner, and he's smart because he lives in a state where Elon Musk is, and that Elon Musk is a liberal. So because Elon Musk has money and is a smart engineer, and he's a leftist, this kid thinks he's therefore, by virtue of living in the same state, just as intelligent and smart as Elon Musk, and that I'm an idiot because I live in the South, and therefore I should listen to everything that he says. And this is the problem with society right now. There's nobody presenting any. Well, conservatives are trying to present facts, but we get shut down because you're a racist, and nobody ever hears the facts. They don't want to hear the facts. So there's no common sense being applied anywhere. It's like everybody is just running around screaming race, 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 and there's not anything to defend yourself, because I didn't say anything racist. Why am I a racist? And so everybody gets scared to say anything, and I'm waiting for the explosion myself, because the world has turned absolutely insane. I watched a video yesterday of a black girl in a store completely tearing the store apart. And my wife, who's from Colombia, South America, she's like, why didn't somebody step up and stop this? Why do they let her tear all this stuff up? And I told her, I was like, well, what would you do? Because the only way to stop this girl from what she's doing is probably to walk up to her and punch her lights out, knock her flat out on the floor. But you can't do that, because then you're going to be in jail. See, the cool thing is she can go do what she's doing, and nobody's going to arrest her, and nobody's going to do anything to her. This is somehow her way of expressing her hatred of white men, or what, I don't even know. The girl she's an idiot, but she annihilated this store. It's going to cost thousands of dollars to repair all this stuff, but nobody cares. It was all about the black girl being able to tear everything up. It had nothing to do with any type of common sense being applied or any issue. If you were to sit that girl down and say, why did you do that? Her issues are so ignorant that there's no way she could articulate them. And the reason that I say that, I'm making a judgment call here, but the reason that I say that is because anyone that will walk in and do something like that and act like that, they're an idiot out of the box. There is no reason to listen to them. So we've done all this stuff in the name of oppression and the name of police violence, and we're going to get into these subjects as we go along. Today, again, is only slavery. But my question today is, I would like for a leftist to do a video and explain to the rest of us, and maybe I'm wrong. I reserve the right to be wrong. I could be completely off base on my assumptions about the Civil War and about who owned slavery and about white men. That, maybe white men really are all the racist people that everybody says that they are. I am white and I don't think I'm racist. And I definitely don't think the fact that I am white makes me racist. That's just ignorant. In fact, the reason that the mere fact that you're saying this to me makes you the racist. But it's like you can't be a racist because you're black or you're a white college kid, but I can be racist because I'm white. And that's just, I don't know. Y'all are making up definitions that I don't even know where you're getting this shit. So, the argument or this particular conversation is let's discuss why all white people are racist by the mere virtue of our ancestry maybe owning slaves. Maybe. Because I would venture to say that the vast majority of the people living in this country, their ancestors did not own slaves. And it's also an interesting fact to keep in mind that the Democrats are the ones that were fighting for slavery, and the Republicans, which was a newly formed party at the time, were the ones that were fighting against slavery. And everybody likes to talk about this switch between, the Democrats becoming the Republicans and the Republicans becoming the Democrats. But there's zero evidence for any of this. And if anybody wants to, we'll do another video where you can present your evidence on, how there was this big switch, because I've not seen any evidence. In fact, the evidence completely annihilates any concept of there being a switch. The only difference is in the Civil War days for slavery, the Democrats openly wanted slaves. Once they lost the war, the next thing that happened is that they became less in your face about wanting slaveries, and they were just intent on keeping the blacks down. And they've been doing that for years. They're still doing that today. And yet every black person votes for them. And the reason they vote for them is because they listen to the bullshit coming out of their mouth, and they never, ever, ever go look to see if they actually did what they said they were going to do when they got elected. Because if they did, they'd be appalled at what has actually happened. All of the things the Democrats have done to hold the black community down, and now they are pointing at all white people being evil. Have you guys ever looked in Congress and the House? They're all white people. There's a few black people, just a few tokens that are up there, but they're all old ass white Democrats. Why is that the case? I don't understand how that works, because if they actually cared, they'd be trying to get the black community up. And there's one simple solution to getting the entire black community up off of their asses and in the workforce, and that's education. But the Democrats have never once improved education. They keep dumbing down all the tests and doing all this other stuff to try to bring the blacks up, but they're not doing it. They don't want to do it because they want the black vote. So this whole concept of slavery and white men bad just doesn't hold up any weight at all, because you just can't prove it. I mean, there's no evidence for it. And like I said, most white people did not have slaves. So how are you grouping my family into slave ownership when we never owned a plantation? We didn't have slaves. And even if we did, it wasn't me. It was an ancestor back during the times, again, that it was normal for people to own slaves. So today, if someone started trying to build a plantation and buy a bunch of slaves, they would be put in jail immediately. Today's time is different than in the past. So you cannot judge the present day on things that happened in the past. That is an ignorant way to look at history. It's an ignorant way to look at the present time. And if you go that route, all you're really going to accomplish is destroying everything, because there's not a single human being on planet Earth that doesn't have something that they're not, maybe not their direct ancestors, but something that their race has done terribly in the past. So let's discuss slavery and why that's an issue today. I really, that's my big question, is why is slavery still an issue in 2020 when it was done in the past? There's not a single person living today that even know, they don't even have any experience in the subject. And the United States is the best country. We've grown through all of that, and we're better today than we ever have been. So, how is it that we're still talking about slavery in 2020? And you thought this video was over. So after I got off the phone, or got done with the video a while ago, I got on the phone with my aunt that I was talking about earlier in the video, and I was getting some information from her on our family to see if in fact we owned slaves and why in the hell we fought in the Civil War. What exactly was the reason that a non-slave owning white man would fight in the Civil War? And what I actually found out was quite interesting. So I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but that is my great 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 grandmother. She was actually married to a trapper in Virginia during the Civil War. They got married before the Civil War. The most interesting part, though, is that is a black woman. So when you look at me and you think that I am a white man, and true, I consider myself a white man, but in reality, I actually have slave ancestry. So this whole thing about blacks and whites and trying to draw a line and say that, you're white and therefore you're privileged, and I'm black and therefore I'm discriminated against, it gets very, very cloudy. Nothing is as simple as you want it to be. In life, things are very, very complicated. So what you really have to start to realize is that the things that you thought were black and white are really much, much more complex, and therefore trying to label something in a single word sentence or a single word description doesn't work. And so the question becomes, okay, well, I have ancestry that is actually from slavery, and therefore the man that was married to this woman went off and fought during the Civil War on the Confederate side. And so it really starts to get interesting to start asking about, well, was the Civil War strictly fought for slavery? Because at the end of the day, if you look at the states that were actually involved in the Civil War and you look at what was going on, and based on what I said earlier, there were very few people that actually owned slaves in comparison to everybody that lived here. And usually they were the rich, the rich guys that owned the big plantations and stuff. What made this woman's husband fight for the Southerners? And so you can kind of draw some simulations or some similarities between what they did and what's going on today, in the sense that when the government steps up and tells you something that you just are completely, they start to try to control your life, and you're totally against them taking that kind of power over you, you're going to fight. And some of the things that it appears that you're fighting for, you're not really fighting for. It's more somebody sticking their hand in your pocket. Like, for example, the Confederate flag. Everybody, when Obama got elected, everybody started raising hell about the Confederate flag. It has never been an issue. In fact, when I was going to school, I've seen black boys driving around with a Confederate flag in their truck. So it's never been a slavery thing. It was never represented slavery. It represented South versus North. And at the time, there was a lot of other things going on, and one of the things was the northern part of the country was trying to get control over the southern part, and they were starting to try to control everything that the Southerners were doing, and they'd had enough. They rebelled against the government because they receded from the country. All of the southern states receded from the United States and said, we don't want to be a part of this. You're trying to take too much power over me, and I'm not willing to put up with it. And that's why the majority of the Southerners fought. They didn't fight for slavery. They weren't fighting because they felt like they needed to own slaves, because most of the people that fought didn't own slaves. And so, yes, slavery was part of the situation. It was part of the problem, and it's part of why the North fought, but it wasn't why the South fought. So to try to label all Southerners as, dumb, redneck, racist, Ku Klux Klan people is, again, it's ignorant, because you're trying to put a label on something that is much, much more complex than what you realize. So I hope, if anything else, that this video kind of shows you that when you start talking about something as simple as slavery and what you think slavery is, as you learn more and more about the subject, things get very, very gray. They get very complex, and they're not nearly as simple as you're trying to make them out to be. And the funniest part of all this is that the government, the ones that even started the Civil War, the government is the one controlling both of us. The government is showing all of the white people that the black people are a bunch of thugs, and they're rapists and murderers, and they're killing each other on the streets, and some of this stuff is true, but that's what they want us to believe. So when we walk down the street, and the black people hate whites, they want us to believe that as well. So when we walk into a store and there's black people standing there, in our head, where we normally wouldn't even think about anything, now we're wondering, do these black people actually hate me? I mean, do these black people actually think that I'm bad just because I'm white? And so the government, the media, they've got me thinking these things when I see a black person now. And then when the black people see me, they're immediately thinking that I'm a racist, because the media and the government want you to believe that I am a racist. So as long as they can keep us fighting, they can make all the money and keep all the control. Because they know that as soon as the blacks and the whites stop fighting and start talking to each other, they're going to realize they got a lot more in common than what they thought, and that the real enemy are the people up in Washington, D.C. They're not your neighbor. They're not the guys that are working in the businesses. They're not the business owners. They're not any of the people that you thought they were. Things are much, much more complex than you've been taught in school. For you white little college kids that think you know everything, they're a lot more complicated than your college professors taught you. And your college professors, all on average, are a bunch of idiots. And so you have, whether you want to admit it or not, you have been brainwashed, and you're running around the streets trying to get a bunch of black people to join you to fight in the name of blackdom and the name of civil rights and all this other stuff. None of it, it's all past. It's all past tense, done, written off, and it's in the books of disgusting history. It's not where we live today. But if you continue to go down the road that you're going, you're going to end up back in the history. You're going to end up in a time where you don't want to have things happen. Maybe whites become slaves, but how is that any better than blacks being slaves? It doesn't further human race. It doesn't further anything. It actually takes us back to terrible times where everybody's dying, we're starving, we're having a fight for everything that we have. Why do we want to do this? Because the government, while we're out here fighting and doing all of the stupid shit that we're doing, the government is up there raking in all the money. They're like, oh, well, you need another program to take care of that, because it's not fair that blacks don't have this or that whites have this. And so we're going to start another program, and we're going to put all of our friends and family in to run this other program so that they can get rich, and all of you dumb shits are going to keep fighting each other, and we're going to keep taking all your money. And that's what's happening. So wake up, people, and let's move on to the next subject tomorrow.